Well, congratulations. You've made it to the final act of Romeo and Juliet. And the last act, of course, is going to bring everything together in some very tragic way, I'm sure, as we already know. There's been so much foreshadowing in this play leading us up to this moment. And we already knew from the chorus at the very beginning of the play what was going to happen. We already knew that Romeo and Juliet were going to die. It's interesting here to pause and think for yourself. Did that change your enjoyment of the play, knowing how it was going to end? It's peculiar, I think, too. Okay, so in Act 5, we change scenes. We've been in Verona, and it tells us at the beginning of Scene 1 of Act 5, now we're in Mantua. Apparently it's a town that's not very far away, because Romeo's been banished and sent there. And he goes to Mantua, and he has a plan. His plan is to kill himself. Much like Juliet's plan, we see a parallel between these two characters. And the parallel continues because Romeo gets poison, and it's a liquid, except that this poison is real. And he's planning to go to Juliet's grave after he finds out that she's dead, and he wants to go there and die with her. Now, the interesting thing about this movement in the plot is that Friar Lawrence sent a letter to Romeo to tell him, Juliet's not really dead. She's sleeping. You need to come save her. But what happened was the letter did not get delivered. Has that ever happened to you? You sent an email or sent a letter and it comes back and is not delivered? It's actually very realistic. This could happen. And it's this seemingly mundane, this unimportant event, a letter not being delivered. Something so small, so insignificant, that leads to the ultimate tragedy in the play. And if we go back to something we talked about a few lessons ago, cause and effect. What is the cause of this tragedy? Here's another example of what might be the cause. Something insignificant, something you would never expect. It's very much like real life and makes it all the more tragic. So, Romeo goes to an apothecary and he buys the poison. And it has some nice imagery here again that makes it more spooky, just like last time. This is in Scene 1, around line 42. In his shop, there's a tortoise hung and alligator stuffed and other skins of ill-shaped fishes about his shelves, a beggarly account of empty boxes, green earthen pots, bladders, and musty seeds, remnants of pack thread and old cakes of roses. A spooky, spooky scene for the audience. Because in Shakespeare time, there wouldn't be very much on the stage. The staging was very limited. It was in the audience's imaginations. That's why we have to visualize the play when we read it. So Romeo buys the poison from the apothecary, and he heads over back to Verona to go to Juliet's tomb. At the same time, it jumps to Scene 2 in Verona, and Paris is going to Juliet's tomb as well, not to kill himself, but to bring her some flowers to put on her tomb. We can see here now that Romeo is being paralleled with Paris. They're very similar in what's going on. The interesting thing here is that if all things have become their contrary, previously, at the very beginning of the play, Romeo was in love with Rosalind, but Rosalind did not love him back. Now at the end of the play, Paris is in love with Juliet, but Juliet does not love him back. It's very interesting when you look at it that way. And that means that these characters might be a type of character called a foil. A foil is when two characters serve to reveal one part of a character. So, Romeo is the opposite of Paris. So, Paris's character helps us understand Romeo, and Romeo's character helps us understand Paris. You can look for characters like that in many other books where they seem to be opposites, but in their opposition, they create the other character. Kind of a complicated idea, but you see it here with Paris and Romeo in this final act. They have become opposites of each other. So, Paris shows up with his servant, they just call him the page, no name, and then Romeo shows up with his servant called Balthazar. And I thought there was an interesting point here in this play because one thing I was talking about was how the play presents different ideas of love. Well, we have another idea of love here with Romeo and Balthazar. Here's what Balthazar says to Romeo. Romeo tells Balthazar, I want you to wait outside of the tomb for me, because Romeo's going to kill himself. He doesn't want Balthazar to stop him, so wait out here for me. And Balthazar says, I will be gone, sir, and not trouble you. And Romeo says, so shalt thou show me friendship. Take thou that, live and be prosperous, and farewell, good fellow. Then Balthazar says, in an aside, means Romeo can't hear him, for all this same, I'll hide me here about. His looks I fear, and his intents I doubt. This is a type of love called filial love. Filial love is when you're devoted to your master. Kind of like if we had a king and I love my king. That's a filial love. Or I have a general and I respect my general. That's a filial love. It's almost like the love between a father and a son. It's a new kind of love we've sort of seen in here, but it's similar to the love that we see in this act between Friar Lawrence and Romeo. Friar Lawrence loves Romeo as a son. That's called paternal love. We have all these different kinds of love in the play, so many different types. Okay, so Romeo is going to go down into the tomb, but then he sees Paris there too. And Romeo at this point is a very fierce character. He's changed into his contrary. He's not a fighter. Mercutio told us that earlier. Romeo doesn't know how to fight. But look at Romeo now. This is what he says to Balthazar, actually. He says, I will tear thee joint by joint and strew this hungry churchyard with thy limbs. Whoa, what a fierce guy. Is he still a lover, or is he a fighter now? Well, he seems to be a fighter. He tells Paris, stay away from me. And Romeo says in line 70, wilt thou provoke me? Then have at thee, boy. And the stage direction tells us they have a fight. Romeo is so quick to anger now and get in fights, not in his character at all. He's changed so much. And he stabs Paris and kills him. Now we have another death. Mercutio's died, Tybalt's died, and now Paris is dead. Two of them at the hands of Romeo. Romeo goes down into the tomb, and he sees Juliet. So this is Act 5, Scene 3. He opens the tomb and sees her lying there. And he thinks that she's dead. So when he says, oh, my love, my wife, it's kind of a weird scene, because keep in mind, Juliet's dead. This is her dead body. And what does Romeo do? He kisses her dead body. It's a very spooky scene, right? Very spooky, like a horror movie almost. And what he says in this line goes back to the personification of death. This is line 103. He says, that unsubstantial death is amorous. He's depicting death here as like a lust-filled creature, a creature that has sex with dead people. Pretty gross. And that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in the dark to be his paramour. A paramour is like a mistress. For fear of that, I will stay with thee and never never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here I will remain, with worms that are thy chambermaids. Very spooky scene in this dark tomb, kissing a dead body, death as the lover, worms. You can imagine how the audience feels when they watch this. So scared of what's going to happen, because the audience knows, we know, Juliet is not dead. And we fear, what is Romeo going to do? Will Juliet wake up? But we know she won't, because the chorus told us that she dies. It's a horrifying scene for the audience here. And then Romeo drinks the drink, and the stage direction tells us he dies. That's the fourth person to die. Following this, suddenly Balthazar runs down there, Friar Lawrence is there, all these people are on the stage because they are running out to Juliet's grave, probably because Friar Lawrence told them she's not really dead. We aren't clear on that. And then Juliet wakes up. So horrible. She wakes up to see that Romeo is lying there next to her. Now how does she feel? Here's what she says. What's here? A cup closed in my true love's hand? Poison I see, hath been his timeless end. O churl, drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after. I will kiss thy lips. Haply some poison yet doth hang on them. So she kisses his lips, hoping there's poison there, but there's not. And then, what happens? She grabs the dagger that she has and calls it, O happy dagger. This is thy sheath. And it says this dagger is Romeo's dagger, and then she stabs herself. This is the climactic moment in the play. And think about it. They got married just a few days before. That night, Juliet was calling for Romeo to come so they could be together on their wedding night. He can't come. He was banished. When do they finally get together? Romeo is dead, and she stabs herself. It's that consummate scene of their wedding night, but it happens in death. This is that death drive, that unity in death at the end of the play. It's very powerful, I think, this scene. Well, all of the older people rush in, and they're like, oh my God, what's going on? Paris is dead, Romeo's dead, Juliet's dead, there's all these dead bodies. What happened here? And this is the line where, who says it? One of the Watchmen. The Watchman comes on, and here's what he says in line 179. He says, we see the ground whereon these woes do lie. These are the dead people. But the true ground of all these piteous woes we cannot without circumstance decry. It's the same question they were asking earlier in the play. How did all this happen? What's the cause of all this? That idea continues. The prince says, till we can clear up these ambiguities, until we can find out what happened, and know their spring, that means know their source, their head, their true descent, then will I be general of your woes. Here too, the prince is asking, how did all this happen? Now we have a scene very similar to when Tybalt was killed by Romeo, another mock trial. Last time, it was Balthazar who told us everything that happened. This time it's Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence has many lines, line 228 to line 268. He just tells everything that happened, the whole plan, the letter that didn't arrive, everything. And the prince says, I need more testimony. So Balthazar comes up and he says, yes, I heard of her death. We came down to see her. We hear that. And then the prince says, this is the trial again, and the prince is going to make his verdict once more. And he says on line 290, where be these enemies, Capulet, Montague? See what a scourge is laid upon your hate. This is where they're getting to what they think is the source of the problem. It's that ancient grudge between Capulet and Montague. That heaven finds means to kill your joys with love, and I, for winking at your discords too. The prince says, it's my fault as well. You two had this grudge, and I've been letting it slide all of this time, and look what happened. This is what happened. We've lost brace of our kinsmen. And last time he said, who's punished? Romeo's punished. Romeo is banished after Tybalt's death. This time the prince says, all are punished. Indeed, they all are. Not only are Romeo and Juliet and Paris and Tybalt and Mercutio all punished, Lady Montague, we learn, has killed herself in grief over her son's death. That's 5 people dead. So they're punished, obviously. But the people who are still alive are punished because they know that it was partly their fault. And Capulet says, O brother Montague, give me thy hand. The ancient grudge seems to be over. This is my daughter's jointure, for no more can I demand. And Montague says back to Capulet, these long hated enemies, I can give thee more. And Montague says, I'm going to make a statue of Juliet, all in gold, as a gift to you. And the play ends with the prince speaking. The prince has the final voice in the play. He's the ultimate judge in the play. And what I like are the last 2 lines. He says, for never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. What I like about that final thought is look how it inverts everything to their contrary. The play is called The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. But the final lines of the play says Juliet and her Romeo. We have an inversion at the end. And this is where I could transition in to think about what would I write about in an essay if I wrote about Romeo and Juliet? So in my classes, after we read something and we talk about it, the students have to write an essay. Well, this is one essay topic that maybe you could try for yourself. Is Juliet the main character in the play? Is Juliet the tragic figure? And if so, what does that say about the play? We think that it's all about Romeo, but maybe it's really all about Juliet. And that's not what's commonly held to be true. Another essay idea that you might be able to try out if you wanted to would be looking at the dichotomies in the text. Like, for example, light and darkness, or young and old. You take those two ideas and you see what's going on with those two aspects in the text. What's being communicated between them? A last idea, if you wanted to write an essay, would be some of the tragic elements you learned from this class that came from Aristotle. That was in the very first lesson. And now that you've finished the play, you can go through. Does Romeo and Juliet follow the classical model as set up by Aristotle? I highly recommend that you try out some of these essay writings, and it'll help you not only remember the play, but also maybe you could write a good essay. Okay, thank you for watching.